We shall. I shall declare the meeting underway yet again. So thank you all very much, and let's moving on. So, is there anything? Do you want to carry on through? Because I think we got as far as the first point, and we then sidetracked. But I think what we've taken from here is perhaps if we could have perhaps identified some of the issues that there might be a conflict between the land use recovery plan and the central city recovery plan, and also the issues that Yanni's raised around the so-called residential red zone. Again, whether there's some issues that we could clarify and build into that, because I mean we will be meeting with the minister during the course of this process, and it might be worthwhile having something to raise. So over to you.
Moving on to the second bullet point, which we've covered briefly, because it overlaps with the previous point, which is the future of temporary recovery activities. Thank you. The suggestion was that this chapter needed to be clearer in terms of what was to happen to temporary recovery activities. And what we've proposed to do is add on page 19 under the temporary recovery activity policy, 3.6.4, you'll see A and B under there are both in red. And essentially, because they are additions, essentially we're saying that in most cases the policy direction is that activities move back into appropriate locations, but in C, recognising that there will be some cases, and I can think of the issue that was raised earlier about the difficulty, particularly for smaller businesses who really have very limited business opportunities in terms of locations for their business, and that there will be limited opportunities, I think, until that progression of movement of businesses into new offices or whatever as the central city develops begins, and therefore the release of some perhaps lower quality accommodation is available. There will be situations like that where some temporary activities need to remain in temporary locations for longer periods, and provided that isn't causing, and you'll see over the page some provisos about looking at what are the effects on the surrounding community, and whether there are wider implications for the district as a whole. Provided that there aren't significant issues in that respect, then perhaps it is appropriate in some cases to allow them to continue for longer than they're currently authorised.
Yeah, I think, can I perhaps use an example of that? So the youth hub, in Barbados Street, which would normally be residential, but, a number of residential facilities or houses taken up by the youth services, youth health, etc. Once they've got a youth facility specifically designed around a range of services and potentially some accommodation as well, then the designation goes back to residential. Yep. But we would facilitate them remaining for where that need is there. Where
the need's there, and taking into account those other environmental impacts and citywide impacts.
Very good. Yanni?
I think this is going to be a minefield. So if you look down Maryvale, for example, you see a number of businesses that have clearly gone in on a permanent basis. They spent huge amounts of money outlaying, retrofitting residential into commercial. So I'm really concerned about this because I think actually people need places to live. And one of the problems, again, it comes back to that lack of affordable office commercial space in areas. But it just seems to me that actually freeing up the housing to enable people to have places to live is more critical than providing cheap space for businesses to go into otherwise residential areas. So, I would really want to have something in here that talks about the need for housing as being critical. I'm a little bit more relaxed around where you've got either mixed use zones or industrial zones, those sorts of things, but I I'm really concerned that this has been added, and I don't understand from a practical point of view how you're actually going to administer it. Like, are you going to get a whole bunch of resource consents coming back in, or are you going to, basically just roll things over?
No. The temporary activities are resolved by April 2016, and by that time they either have to have sought a resource consent for permanent location there, or they might choose to go to the Minister to ask for an extension of that temporary activity timeframe.
Except they won't be able to beyond April
Well, no,
2016
that's
because the
right.
order and councils expire at that point.
But before then, I mean, that's really all that can happen. And
But
the
it can't
council
go beyond.
No, it can't
That's
go
as I
beyond.
understand it, yeah.
Oh.
And that was something that I didn't realise until
Beyond
I was looking
2016.
at April 2016, all the orders and councils expire. Orders and
Unless
councils.
this council chooses to do something else with
To
those
adopt,
consents.
yeah,
That's
a change in
correct.
the plan.
Yeah.
So has there been any work done around the number of temporary consents, which ones are in which zones?
Yeah, there's a lot of detailed work about that.
So when can
Yeah,
we
I
see
think
that?
it would be really useful to have that work. So that would be, is that,
The context.
yeah. So for context because it's both residential and commercial, isn't it?
Yes, it
Because
is.
there are a lot of shops that are operating
Yep.
in
Offices,
residential.
shops, small businesses.
Yep.
And
Now, did you wanted that just to be given to you for reference, that information?
Well, I guess so, but
I mean, I want
How do you
hard
mean?
facts. So I know, like, if we've got 1,000 residential properties that now have temporary consents for offices and commercial, I just think that's something we'd really want to know, because we
Yeah.
might actually go,
Yeah.
well, actually, we need
Okay.
housing.
Yeah.
Likewise, the temporary villages, are
Can
they
It's
part of
public
this?
information.
could you do that?
Yes.
Get somebody to give us the numbers, but could you break them down into areas so that there are 20 in Maryvale, there are so many in Papanui.
We can get that to you by the end of the week.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
And
Sorry,
type.
and type of activities. Yep.
Yeah, it's, look, just on that, there is actually a temporary shopping centre down Papanui Road, called Papanui and Maryvale Lane. And I was talking to one of the tenants who's also located in the tannery about a week or so back, and she's signing a new lease because they understand their temporary licence has been extended from 5 years to longer. That's the understanding, but this is what the owner is telling the tenant.
Well, unfortunately, there isn't always a lot of good understanding out there with real estate agents. Yep. We'd have to see that particular consent to be able to confirm it falls under this category.
I think what you might be getting confused with, if this is the Metro Cafe, councillor?
It's not Metro Cafe, it's one of the tenants there, but
Yeah,
there's a bunch of containers with a roof on it.
Yep.
The problem with this is actually we need residential and we need business. And you can't just have houses if there's no jobs. Where are people going to work? So the reality is we have a huge squeeze in supply, and that's not going to go away. But what I think is going to happen is, I mean, places like Metro, a good example, is they may end up staying because people actually like them. And I think it's going to be very difficult to plan for all the outcomes that we're going to see, because some things actually, some of the residential conversions, cool.
Yeah, I think
It's
though that if
interesting.
you were applying a proper planning process, you wouldn't put a coffee shop on the middle in Papanui Road with no supporting infrastructure and an entrance and an exit that's almost impossible to
It's
navigate.
terribly designed.
Yeah, but it wouldn't
place.
be designed like that
Yeah.
if it was a normal planning process.
Yeah.
That's the point. But I think having.
But I don't think we're in a normal planning
We're-
process.
no,
and we
we're
may
not.
be for
That
a
was
long time.
actually the point that I made before.
I was
Councillor
napping.
Manji.
I was napping.
Councillor Manji, I'm going to call you.
I've got to get some sleep.
Sorry, you're in trouble now, right? Glenn Livingston.
Thank you. I've asked for this at the Consents Committee. We have been provided with a part breakdown into residential, but so just if you want to check with
We
Sparrow,
do have the information.
so there's no double up in the, yeah.
We can get it for commercial industrial too.
But we don't know how low it goes in terms of
Yeah.
too much in terms of housing by ward, etc. So
Andrew Turner.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we need to be really careful what sort of messages we send on this, because of course you've got businesses out there that are in temporary premises at the moment that are very aware of that sunset clause in 2016, and as soon as we start to send a message that says something other than that, we raise a level of expectation that perhaps things are going to be different, and we've already heard a couple of examples of how that could be the case. And there's an issue here about temporary becoming permanent, and of course if something is established as a temporary activity that's able to make itself a complying activity, then great, but in allowing temporary to become permanent, if there isn't an actual need to do that, we possibly actually give an incentive to prevent that business finding permanent accommodation, for that landowner to build a permanent building because they've got a rental stream coming in from a temporary activity, maybe running from a container and so on. So I think before we could make a decision on this, we would need to know how many displaced businesses there are, where they are, what types of activity, so that we don't actually end up thinking we're doing the right thing by those businesses, but we actually end up with a load of unintended outcomes even within the business community before we even start thinking about the need for residential accommodation as well.
Yep. All right, so next one. Oh.
Though, on that, there are a lot of the temporary solutions are actually really cool. So
Absolutely.
I'm not keen that we just have one size fits all for whatever goes forward. I think a lot of them have actually, some of the kind of office use in residential areas works incredibly well. I really like it. I think it's shown us what's actually possible. So I'm just clear that I just want us to be clear that there isn't a set of rules that will necessarily work for all of them, because some have worked and some haven't.
I know
that's the difficulty.
What we're proposing to provide here is an avenue to allow proposals to be considered for temporary recovery activities. And if there are specific areas, then that then becomes a matter of, okay, do we actually, if there are areas that have developed that are appropriate, then you can zone them.
Yeah.
So that's something you can do in detail. But this really provides an avenue that if somebody has got problems finding alternative accommodation for their business, then they can, this is the avenue that says, okay, we will at least be able to consider that and make a decision on their case as to whether it's appropriate they stay there for longer.
One logical one is the Epic Centre, which we will want to extend beyond the current five-year period, because they're certainly not like the rest of the city is now built out.
But it's not a it's not affected by our plan. It's affected by the Central City Recovery Plan, which is again a consistency argument, because I think that they were already underway before the rule came in around mixed use, and actually the only thing that they don't comply with is the mixed use. So and again, I think that that's another classic example of where we could look for developing some consistency through the three plans or the three components, and maybe that's something we could raise with the Minister. I think it's an unintended consequence, that one, quite frankly. Eh? Well, but sometimes there are, and that's why having a healthy review and a conversation about these things often resolves them.
I think that April 2016, when you think of all the businesses who are out in temporary premises, I mean, who is going to be building stuff for them to move into by April 2016? I mean, they could be there ages. I can't see it happening. One, because no one can build in the central city anyway, even the basic stuff like hotels and what have you. But who's going to supply that whole range of kind of, low to medium rent, small businesses? Those are the ones who are out in the temporary accommodation.
That's right.
They're not going to have stuff to move into.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's not that far away.
No. I'm very mindful of that. Well, it will.
So you're looking for
Be just about the end of my job. My job is done. Right.
You want to get that?
Pauline.
Just clarification, sorry, I'm getting a bit foggy, but if they wanted to stay on, would they have to apply for resource consent?
Yes.
So, I mean, a lot of them wouldn't be able to afford to do that. It's quite is there any way we can, facilitate that process to be not such an encumbrance on a small business? I just think it's a huge thing for existing business to have to do.
Yeah, well, that's something that we need to take into account ourselves. But in terms of clarifying what is intended to happen, given that there is an end date, I actually think we have to address it. Whether we agree with the outcome, that will be our decision to make. But we have to clarify what is intended to happen. So I totally agree with the advice, and then our question will be how. And then the implementation is a separate step again.
It would be publicly notified as well, which is dearer against.
No, not necessarily.
And it would be prohibited, wouldn't it, or non-compliant?
No.
It still has to be publicly notified.
What we're saying is that if it's a temporary use that's been authorised, then you would look at the effects on the surrounding community and the environment and the implications on the recovery of the district as a whole, including the loss of housing. So you've got, it's got a couple of tests there to apply.
And it will depend on each separate situation. Some of them may need no notification at all and maybe just a written approval by the neighbours, and others of them might have limited notification.
Yeah.
One of the issues is that people did not have a chance to be consulted in this consent issue.
No.
That's right.
And where there was controversial ones, for example, people have been putting up with it.
Yeah, there are.
Mm-hmm.
It will expire.
And some office space and residential might be fine for the people that are working there,
That's
but
right.
it ain't fine for the
That's
neighbours
right.
who've had to put up with tons of car parks being taken outside their homes.
I just think it's just to me, it's just opening up a huge can of worms. I'd like to see some refinement around what an exception space is to be a process for consideration. But
Yeah.
the way I would see it, it's just sort of like quite a wide range of conditions.
Yep. So I think that our strong view is that we have to clarify what is intended to happen, and I think the feedback that you're getting is that we don't want to cut off the date at April 2016, which is what the law would require. But we do want to manage against the those unintended consequences and those flow-on effects to the neighbours, which you have taken as the effects on the surrounding community and the environment, and maybe some reference to residential amenity would. I don't know if that's the right language, but it's where you've got what wouldn't normally be allowed in a residential area, that then impinges on the their environment. That's I think Yanni's made a very good point, which is they weren't consulted about the original change in use.
Right.
All right.
Okay, so moving on to the third bullet point, which relates to Ngāi Tahu seeking stronger recognition of Ngāi Tahu as mana whenua, their relationship with water, land, air, and other values of significance to Ngāi Tahu. They're, of course, quite appropriate, and we have worked through, both in this chapter and with other chapters, very closely with MKT and representatives of Ngāi Tahu, essentially clause by clause, adding in amendments and working through issues. So there are actually quite a number of changes right throughout the document. Some of them will be very obvious because we've incorporated Maori names and things like that. Others, perhaps ones that I particularly would refer to, will be on page 19 under Objective 3.6.1 to emphasise the recognition of the relationship between Ngāi Tahu and land. Then on page 20, Objective 3.6.2, the importance of green links for biodiversity. Then page 23, so these are all be the red type you'll see there. Page 23, objective 3.6.4, the importance of springs, lagoons, mahinga kai, and then the following policy under 3.6.4.1 on page 24, emphasising the cultural importance of not having stormwater flowing directly into natural waterways.